One of the most basic distinctions in research methodology is the distinction between qualitative research and quantitative research. So what is the difference between the two? There are several differences. One difference is the type of data that to use. In qualitative research, the data can be almost anything. It can be text, it can be images, it can be audio. While in quantitative research, data tends to be numerical. At the maximum, it has a few labels in there, such as, for example, whether a person received the treatment or whether that person didn't receive a treatment. Another difference is how the data is collected. In qualitative research, the data collection tends to be unstructured, flexible, and sometimes a little bit subjective, whereas in quantitative research, the data collection tends to be structured, standardized, and relatively objective. So let's have a look at a little example. An example of qualitative research could be an interview or survey with spontaneous, open-ended questions. So there's no clear plan in advance where the interview will go, but the interviewer just follows the flow of the interview and asks questions in whatever way seems to make sense. Those questions also tend to be open-ended so that there's no predefined answer. An example of quantitative research, on the other hand, could be again an interview or survey, but this time with predefined and close-ended questions. So this time the researcher thought about the questions and the order of the questions in advance. The questions are also close-ended in the sense that there is a set of possible answers, and all the respondent can do is select one of these predefined answers. Another difference between qualitative and quantitative research is the usage. As a rule of thumb, qualitative research tends to be great and popular in unexplored research topics and topics that are hard to quantify. The reason for this is that in unexplored research topics, it's often not clear where the research should go and, for example, what questions make the most sense to ask. So in that case, it makes more sense to just go with the flow of the conversation and see where the conversation leads us. A disadvantage of this is, of course, that it can be very subjective. The results can be heavily influenced by the choices the researcher makes during the data collection. Therefore, as a rule of thumb, in more explored research topics, quantitative research tends to be very popular and widespread because it is great for precision and zooming into details with relatively high objectivity. Because of this, as a rule of thumb, research tends to evolve from more qualitative research towards more quantitative research. As the topic gets more explored, researchers move from qualitative methods to more quantitative methods. So just to illustrate how this works, let's have a look at a little example. Let's say that you do research about an unexplored culture. The first thing you could do is just go to the people and have a conversation and see what kind of topics pop up. So for example, you could ask a general question such as, "Would you mind telling me a little bit about your everyday life?" Then the person might say something like, "I work as a manager and my wife works as a waitress." Maybe after talking to a couple of people, you notice that there seems to be a pattern. It seems to be that men tend to have higher positions compared to women. But so far this is just an impression, so it would be nice to quantify this. So you might think that maybe I should compare the annual wages of men and women. Then you have moved from a qualitative approach where you ask open-ended questions to a more quantitative approach where you use numerical data to learn something about that culture. Another nice analogy is also when you get an exam at your medical doctor. So in that case, the doctor may first ask a general question such as, "How can I help you today?" Then you may say something like, "I feel weak for a few days." And then based on that, the doctor may think that maybe you have a fever. So let's measure your temperature. Then the doctor has basically moved from a qualitative approach towards a more quantitative approach where he zooms into the details. That is illustrative of how research often tends to evolve. It often starts with qualitative research, and then it moves step by step towards more quantitative research. So the key lessons of this video are that qualitative research uses a more unstructured and flexible approach, which tends to work well in unexplored research fields, whereas quantitative research uses a more structured and standardized approach, which works well for zooming in into details with relatively high objectivity. And in well-researched fields, quantitative research tends to be the most common. Not all the time, but as a rule of thumb. Because of that, this course is going to focus heavily on quantitative research, because most of the time, especially if you're a beginner, you will find yourself in a research field that is already quite well explored. You're just trying to fill a gap in that research field, which you often do with quantitative research. Okay, that's it for this video. I'll see you in next one.